Hey folks, this is Paul talking about A Course in Miracles. Heaven on earth. What is heaven on earth? Is it even possible? I've been having a lot of discussions lately about earth and heaven and the world again with people. There's so much varying opinion about whether the world is real, is it not real, is it a creation, is it not a creation, is it part of God, can God have created it if it has certain things in it, can part of God die and be sick and broken, what's going to happen to the world, blah blah blah. So from what I've kind of come to, this is kind of my current best opinion. I particularly looked at quotes about the reflection of heaven on earth, because these are the quotes where we really get some clarity about the distinction between a reflection of heaven on earth and actually being in heaven. Those are two different things, and effectively they're two different locations. So we need to look first at the idea of what is this world here. Now, in A Course in Miracles, we're basically told that there was a separation event, and this separation event was an opposition to God's reality. First there was God, and then we opposed that, and we tried to dream up and believe in something that's completely opposite to God. So if God is everything, it's an idea of nothing. If God is everywhere, it's an idea of nowhere. So we dreamed up this idea of an existence, or a realm, or a world that really is the idea of nothingness. It's the idea of emptiness. It's a lack of God. It's a lack of light. It's a lack of love. As the Course talks about how sin is a lack of love. And so in the separation, we basically denied God and pushed it away and tried to produce a second realm of experience, a second world, a second thought system, a second order of reality, a different kind of reality, which had to be completely opposite in every way to the nature of God in order for there to be seemingly two. They had to be distinct, they had to be different. So the world we made, which we call space-time, which houses the galaxies and the planets and planet Earth and bodies, was the result of this attack on God. The world was made as an attack on God. It was a place where God could enter not, i.e. the idea of God doesn't exist here. So we made a kind of a world that was basically nothing in truth, but we believed in it as though it was something. Now the Course says that there was a projection of this error outwards, and the world arose to hide it and became the screen on which the error was projected. So what that's saying is that we projected out this space-time as a emptiness or a lack of God, and it kind of acted like an empty screen or a sense of nothing onto which we then projected. So it says, like, the world is nothing in itself. Your mind must give it meaning. So the world, Earth, is nothing. It's neutral because it's nothing. It has no real attributes of its own. It's a lack of everything. So it's really empty and devoid. You could think of it as a void, an emptiness. And then your mind has to give it meaning because it doesn't have any meaning. It's a meaningless world. So as the Course then says, earth can reflect heaven or hell. And if a mind creates without love, it can create an empty shell, and this can be possessed by evil. So basically, the world that we made, Earth, or space-time, was made without love. It was made in an attempt not to love, so it was made as an attack on love, on God, and it produced a sense of emptiness, a sense of lack, and a sense of no God, a sense of nothing. And we then attempted to give meaning to this nothing. Now it's important to realize that the nothingness doesn't really have any meaning. It's meaningless. So it doesn't mean depressed and dark and hellish and bad and evil necessarily. It's actually kind of neutral. So nothing, a meaningless world is a world that doesn't have any meaning, including negative meanings or positive meanings. It's no meaning. So it's this neutral screen which doesn't mean anything. So Jesus goes on to say, once we've made this projected screen that is the world, which is space and time and planet Earth, we then have to project onto what we have projected as a world. So there's two projections. You first made the world as a neutral nothing, an illusion of nothingness, which is space, time, and Earth, and then the mind had to give it meaning and put meaning onto it to try to make it mean something, because it was nothing. So you've got projections about the world, which is a projection, and you've got the world itself is a projection. So you have two layers of illusions, and this is something a lot of people don't understand, that the world itself is an illusion, being opposite to reality. It's an illusion of a world, but you also have distortions about the world, and they're both illusions. So as he says here, this then represents a situation in which God and the ego seem to challenge each other as to whose meaning will be written in the empty space which meaninglessness provides. So there's now this void of empty space, which literally symbolized by outer space, which is practically a void, empty void, and either God or the ego is going to project meaning onto the empty nothingness. So now you've got the nothingness, meaningless world, the world of form, the world of space-time, and the ego wants to give it its own meaning. So as we get into separation, you start to develop a separate identity, and it starts to believe things that are evil and will project these evil things onto the world. The world was made to hide these evil things by projecting it outwards. So we made a world based on an evil idea of opposition to God producing nothing. And then we even went further and put meanings of nothingness and lack and emptiness and so on onto the meaningless world. So the ego tries to give the meaningless world meaning. So it's a situation in which God and the ego challenge each other as to whose meaning will be written in the empty space which meaninglessness provides. The ego rushes in frantically, trying to establish its own ideas, fearful that the void may otherwise be used to demonstrate its unreality. So now the ego takes a neutral, artificial opposite to God world and projects negative, unholy meanings onto it, which means basically taking this world and dividing it and focusing on its differences. This is false perception. This is your interpretation of an illusory world, where you take space-time and you dwell on and emphasize the ways that things are different, and you compare and contrast, and you separate things out, and you say this is not that, and this body isolates you over here, and that body isolates you there, and things aren't shared, and everything's separate. And there's this sort of focus on division and fragmentation and conflict and war is a way of looking at the neutral world that we made up in such a way that makes it look like hell. So, as it says, earth can reflect heaven or hell. So, my voice is a little scratchy today. So we take the physical, which is not real and is a meaningless, neutral, nothing world, and we interpret it through a lens of evil and separateness and selfishness and specialness and exclusion and isolation and so on, and focusing on form, particularly believing that the form of objects gives them meaning, creating a hierarchy of illusions and so on, as a kind of an attack upon the world, which is an attack upon God. So there's two layers of attack. When you're in ego, you are attacking a world that was made originally as an attack on reality. So the world attacks reality because it's trying to be opposite to the nature of God. It's trying to be nothing. And then the ego comes along and attacks the void and tries to give the void meaning, and it projects sin and guilt and fear and stuff onto it. So now you're in false perceptions of the world, about the world, once removed from the world. But this doesn't mean that underneath those projections, the world itself has objective reality. The world itself was put there before we started to interpret it in an ego way. The ego rushed in and tried to give it meaning, to fill the void with its own meaning so that the ego wouldn't be implied as not existing. So it had to kind of invent meaning to justify itself and perpetuate itself. So we project stuff onto the world, but that doesn't mean the world is objectively real. We have subjective views, false perceptions, ego perceptions about a world that isn't really there, which itself is a rejection of God. This is not really well understood. A lot of people think that there's only subjectivity and objectivity, and that if I have issues about the world, it means the world has its own inherent truth, its inherent reality, its objectiveness, and it's there, and I'm just not seeing it for the way that it is. In a sense, the world is objectively true, but only in the sense that objectively speaking, it is false. The world is actually false. The one you made is false. But the stuff that just because I'm projecting stuff on top of this screen of emptiness doesn't mean the screen is real. Just because I'm having false ideas about an illusory world doesn't mean the world is reality. Just because I may put guilt and sin onto planet Earth doesn't mean that Earth is God's creation. It's two layers. So Earth is a void, Earth is a nothingness. It's really, space-time is an illusion of a world. But we keep giving it meaning because it's nothing. So it's like a mirror. So because it doesn't have any attributes of its own, it doesn't have any true inherent nature that's real. So the world, the screen of nothing, isn't really there and doesn't really exist, and therefore doesn't have its own identity or image. So it's kind of like a mirror in that it can reflect things. It can reflect images and meanings that you put onto it through projection, similar to how there's a projection of light coming from your body, reflecting in a mirror, and you see the picture or the image of your body in the mirror. But this doesn't mean that the body in the mirror is a body or has reality. It just means it's once removed and is a reflected image. And you can only see a reflection in a mirror because the mirror itself doesn't contribute anything to what you see. It just shines back what you give it. So the mirror is neutral, and the mirror is nothing. There's no image inherent to the mirror. So the mirror itself, the space-time bubble, the planet Earth and the galaxies act like a mirror because they are nothing, because they don't have their own attributes. They are a lack of attributes. In the Course, Jesus says something about the body cannot be meaningfully endowed with attributes of Christ. The body is nothing and is merely neutral. So you can't give the body the meaning of being holy, and you can't really give the body the meaning of being unholy. It is not sinful, and it's not sinless, because even saying that it's sinless is a meaning. So the body is really physically nothing at all. At no time does the body really exist. So by extension, the world, the environment the body's in, part of planet Earth, is really nothing, and it has no attributes. So you can't meaningfully say that Earth is hell, and you can't say that Earth is heaven. But you can project stuff onto it. Now, Jesus also says the only thing of value in the world is whatever part of it you look upon with love. This gives it the only reality it will ever have. Its value is not in itself. So you can take a neutral nothing world, which is opposite to God, and you can project onto a neutral nothing world ideas of love and holiness and peace and happiness, which will be then seen in the world as a reflection, like in a mirror. Because the world is nothing, it's able to reflect back to you the love and the peace and the holiness that you put onto it. And so you can see in it the love and the peace and the holiness, because that's what you're giving to it. But they don't belong to it. It's not inherent to the world itself. The world itself does not have any meaning. The world itself is not holy, is not pure, is not loving, is not kind, is not happy, is not peaceful, or permanent. It doesn't have any of the attributes of God. The world is nothing. There is no world. An opposite to God does not exist, Jesus is saying. But you can give it meaning, and as you're giving it the holiness that's in your mind, or the awareness of God that's in your mind, God is in everything I see because God is in my mind. That doesn't mean that the things that you're looking at are God. You're still looking at a reflection shining back and bouncing off the world and shining back to you, showing you what you've given it. Not because God is the world. The world is not God. But because the image or the symbolic forgiveness is a symbol of love. It's an earthly form of love. When you give forgiveness to the world as love, a form of love, a dream of love, you project love onto it and it bounces back as a reflection. And you see in the nothingness of the world a seeming oneness, or a seeming holiness, or a wholeness, or a unification, which can easily be misinterpreted as heaven because it's very much like heaven. But it is a reflection. It is once removed from actual heavenly reality, and it is being bounced back to you as an image. And there is a big difference between an image of heaven and actual heaven. Okay. Nothing which it is, the body cannot be meaningfully invested with attributes of Christ or the ego. Either must be an error, for both would place the attributes where they cannot be, and both must be undone for the purpose of truth. The world is nothing in itself. This does mean planet Earth, and it doesn't mean projections onto the world, interpretations about the world are nothing in themselves, although that's partly true also. It literally is saying the world itself, the physical space-time planet Earth, without any perception coming into it, is nothing in itself because it was made to oppose everything. Your mind must give it meaning, and it's in the your mind must give it meaning part is where perception comes in. So your mind gives meaning to a world that is nothing in itself. Your mind can give ego meaning to a world that is nothing in itself and turns Earth into something that is experienced like hell. Your mind, which is also able to change its mind and be variable and have a different subjective view, can also project meanings of love and holiness and God and oneness onto a world that is nothing and see those in it. But the world itself is nothing, and these things are projected. Good meanings, bad meanings are projections onto a void of emptiness. What you behold upon it are your wishes, acted out so that you can look on them and think them real. This includes wishes of attack and sin and guilt, and it includes wishes of love and healing and holiness. So we are in a situation where we project onto the world stuff, meanings, which can either be ego, which makes it reflect hell, or it can be God, which makes it reflect heaven. But the thing that it's reflected in is not really there. It is a fake illusion of a world. So just because I'm projecting onto the world does not mean that the world has its own objective reality. The truth about the world is that it is not a world. It is nothing. There is no space. There is no time. There is no planet Earth. There is no sun. There are no stars, and there is no galaxies. And the empty void of space doesn't really exist. But temporarily, I can choose what I want to see in the reflection while I'm repurposing the void in such a way that it gets me ready for leaving the void of exile and going back to heaven, which is not this place. The world is nothing in itself. A different interpretation of the body will change your mind entirely about its value. Of itself, it has none. So the physical body has no value. Jesus says the body is hardly worth the least offense. It is valueless, nothing, and it is cast off. Because the body is part of the void. It's part of a nothing, pretending to be a something. Jesus speaks about the last judgment, the final judgment of God upon this world. This world that it's referring to is earth and space and time. The world that was made to oppose the nature of God. Earth, heaven's opposite in every way. A world in which everything takes a direction exactly opposite to the truth. The nothing world, which is earth and space-time, God in the atonement gives a final judgment upon what we have made, which includes both the neutral nothing world and our projections onto the world. And he says, the truth must be brought to the last comparison that you'll ever make, the last evaluation possible, the final judgment upon this world. It is the judgment of the truth upon illusion, of knowledge, the kingdom of heaven, upon perception, space-time. The Course literally says the world is perception. The judgment is this: it has no meaning and does not exist. The earth mirror world does not exist, has no meaning. It is a meaningless world. We made a meaningless world. Ego, false perceptions project artificial, meaningless meanings onto the meaningless world and give it artificial, false meanings that aren't true of the world and are attacks. True perception and forgiveness projects happy meanings, mirroring God, reflecting God onto the meaningless world, and sees the meaning of love in the world, holiness in the world. But it is a reflection and not a first-hand reality, because the world itself has no meaning and does not exist. Creation cannot even be conceived of in the world. It has no meaning here. Forgiveness is the closest it can come to earth. Forgiveness is a symbolic form of love, an earthly form of love. Creation is impossible in the world, which means the world is not a creation. The void of space-time is not God's creation. Because creation is meaning. It's fully meaningful. we made a world as an attack on meaning, to reject all meaning, which made a meaningless world. And then our ego, or our sense of being a separate mind, perceives the meaningless world and judges it and decides what it means, because it has no meaning. And there we go. Okay, the body no more dies than it can feel. It does nothing. Of itself, it is neither corruptible nor incorruptible. It is nothing. This is something that some people that think that planet Earth is real and is a creation and it's part of God and it's God's will and it's what God wants to keep forever, don't want to look at the fact the body is nothing at all. The world, Earth, is nothing at all. These are not references to perceptions. These are not references talking about interpretations of, thoughts about, meanings given. This is the inherent nature of the body, is that it does not really exist. The inherent nature of the world is that there is no world there. It's an illusion of a world. It's not really a world. It is true that the body has no function of itself. The test of everything on earth, when Jesus says on earth, which is in many quotes, he is literally talking about being on the planet, physically here, and very often opposed to being in heaven. There are many quotes that compare and contrast on earth and in heaven, because they are two different places. Heaven is the dwelling place of the Son of God. The test of everything on earth and not heaven is simply this: what is it for? The answer makes it what it is for you. It has no meaning of itself. So literally it's saying earth has no meaning. That's exactly what it is referring to. The test of everything on earth. Everything on earth, here, space-time, physical, is that it has no meaning of itself, and you can give it meaning. You give reality to it according to the purpose which you serve. Darkness is a lack of light. It does not have unique properties of its own. Earth is a shadow. Shadows are a lack of light. They're not the presence of darkness. Darkness cannot shine away light, but because they depend on a blockage to the light. So if the light is shining, there cannot be a shadow. Where there is a shadow, there is a blockage to light. It is only because of the blockage that the shadow seems to show up. If the blockage is removed and the light shines, light always shines away darkness. The separation from God was a separation from light. You denied light and tried to cause darkness. But the darkness could not have attributes of its own. So it really was just the projected result of a blockage to the light. So we blocked the light, and it seemed to induce darkness only as a lack of light, not as the presence of darkness. So the world, space-time, earth, is darkness. It is the void. It is the emptiness and the lack, the absence of God. It does not have unique properties of its own. So we have to then give it meanings. And even if you give it meanings that are pure and holy and innocent, it still doesn't have meanings of its own. If I could shine a bright light into a mirror, I can see a bright light shining at me in the mirror. It does not mean that the mirror is a bright light. The mirror is neutral and nothing. Earth has no real meaning of its own. It is the idea of darkness. And you give it light by shining light onto it. There's a part in the Course where it says, God loves the world. How can it be that God loves the world? You don't love the world because you don't give it peace. So how is peace possible in the world? Those who give peace to the world see peace in the world because they put the peace there through projection by giving it the meaning of peace. But if they didn't do this and they stopped projecting peace onto the world would be still nothing. Because the world is not peace. And when you're in false perception, you focus on the not peace, which makes you believe the world is the opposite of peace, or that it's sinful or stressful or difficult or a war zone, battlefield, because you focus on ways that it seems to be not peaceful. But of itself, it isn't peaceful or unpeaceful. It's nothing. All of these attributes are given it by you. The world is meaningless in itself. So this again is a reference to a world. It's not referring to a perceptual world. It is not referring to judgments about the world. It's not referring to things that you give the world. It's saying the world itself, separate from your subjective perceptions of it, which can be either false or true, unloving or loving, unforgiving or forgiving, in and of itself the world is meaningless. So planet Earth has no real attributes of any kind, and that's why there's no world. My voice is a little congested today. I apologize. I hope you can make out what I'm saying. In the world, you can become a spotless mirror in which the holiness of your Creator, who is in heaven, shines forth from you to all around you. You can reflect heaven here, taking heaven in your mind and shining it upon the world. The reflections of images of false gods would dim the mirror which holds God's reflection. Earth can reflect heaven or hell, God or the ego. So when you project ideas of false gods or idols or specialness or worship or bodies and so forth, and you giving it false meanings, it dims the mirror and covers the mirror with dirt. And then you can't see the perfect, clear reflection of God in the world because you've covered it over with a layer of falseness. So you've added falseness on top of a false world. Or should we perhaps say you've added very heavy negative meanings on top of a neutral world. And this clouds the mirror and makes it hard for you to see God's reflection in the world. But when you become clear as a mirror yourself, inside yourself, your mind becomes empty of ego, you are able to reflect God. You become a God-like reflection, and you are then able to shine that onto the world. And having not put dirt and grime on top of the neutral world, you will now see a reflection of meaningfulness in the world, a reflection of love and holiness, and peace and happiness, a reflection of God in the neutral nothing mirror. And this will seem to give the nothing world the meaning of heaven. And it will seem to be, to your perception, it will seem that you see heaven in it. And everywhere you look, everything will seem to be a part of you. And there will be a sense of oneness even. A reflection of heaven, seen in the mirror, not as the mirror, that your mind reflects and puts onto the world, allowing you to see heaven's reflection in the neutral mirror. So now you see light in the world as if there's light in the world, but it's not really a part of the world. You see God in everything you see because God is in your mind, and so you project and perceive God onto the world and see God reflected in the world. And now you seem to see God reflected back to you in the world, and you think God is there in the world. But this does not mean that the world is God. The world is still a neutral mirror acting as nothing with no inherent meaning. It is not God. It is an illusion of a world. It is a void. You see the presence of everythingness reflecting back to you from the mirror of nothingness, which makes it seem as if God is the world is heaven, but that's not correct. So we have to be very careful, because seeing the reflection of heaven on earth will be so like heaven, because your mind's going to be in a state of kind of oneness, wholeness, happiness, love. Everywhere it looks, everything that used to appear to be the sights and sounds of hell will be translated into a vision of Christ or a perception of holiness. Happy sights and sounds reach the mind that has forgiven the world, but not because the world itself is a happy thing. A machine gun is going to still be a machine gun. You can say it's neutral. If you look upon it with false perception, you'll see it as a threat and a danger and a guilty thing. If you look upon it with forgiveness, you'll see it as beautiful and harmless and so on. But in and of itself, it's still what it is. It's still just a piece of junk. It's still just an object. It's neutral. So we'll go on to the next part. Those who have learned to offer only healing, which is an advanced state, because of the reflection of holiness in them, are ready for heaven. So if you're in the reflection of heaven on earth, the purpose of getting to the reflection isn't to stay on earth in a reflection of heaven, or the very, very subtle distinction between earth reflecting heaven and you being in heaven, because earth reflecting heaven as a result of you projecting heaven onto it does not mean that earth is inherently heaven. It's still a dream. It's still a separation state. So Jesus will now go on to start talking about how you become ready to leave the void, leave space-time, leave the separate state, leave the realm of perception, leave the world you made, leave the earth and the body, and go to heaven, which is a different dimension, a different kingdom entirely. Those who have learned to offer healing because of the reflection of holiness in them are ready at last for heaven. So you've gone up in your perception and you've reached this high level. You're reflecting holiness. You're seeing holiness in the world, not because the world is holy, but because you're putting the holiness there. And the holiness has reality, but the mirror does not. You do that in order to get ready for heaven. There, in heaven, holiness is not a reflection, but rather the actual condition of what was reflected to them here. Because God is no image, and his creations as a part of him hold him in them in truth. They do not merely reflect the truth, for they are the truth. So this is the distinction. Heaven is a place where holiness and innocence and love and creation are. They exist, they're real, they are permanent, they are inherent nature of God's being. The reflection of heaven on earth symbolizes that as an image reflected in a mirror of a space-time that is nothing. The reflection is heaven-like, but it is only a symbol, and it is not the thing itself. So even though you can feel very loving, very holy, very healing, very peaceful in the world, it is not the same condition, the same inherent state as when you go to heaven and are in those attributes. And this is a very important distinction. This is where some people stop at the idea of heaven on earth. They confuse the mirror for the reflection, and they think that because they see the reflection in the mirror, that the mirror itself has become holy. The bodies are suddenly holy, and so on. And the Course does mention now, is the body holy? But what it means is it's been given a reflection of holiness and a holy purpose. Because as he also says, you cannot meaningfully invest the body with the attributes of Christ. Holiness is positive and the body is merely neutral. So you can't have the body be holy, but it can symbolize holiness. So he's saying that you first experience the reflection of heaven on earth, heaven put onto the earth, projected on the earth as the forgiven world, or the real world, and that gets you ready to go to heaven, which requires that you leave and transcend the void, the space-time, the physical, the world you made to be opposite to heaven has to be gone beyond to go into an inherently holy state. So some people don't seem to like this idea that you're going to have to let go of the earth, or that the body isn't going to be permanently holy, or that God didn't actually create and make a part of himself planet Earth. they don't quite want to go all the way. They're willing to get to the point of saying earth can reflect heaven, and earth can be very holy seeming, and you can love it. But they don't quite want to let go all the way to realizing that it is a reflection of heaven and is not the same thing as being in heaven itself. Forgiveness is the way that I will recognize my innocence. It is the reflection of God's love on earth. It will bring me near enough to heaven that the love of God can reach down to me and raise me to my home, which immediately means earth is not your home. Forgiveness is a reflection of God's love on earth, which brings me close to heaven so that I can be raised into my home, which is not earth. As I begin to see, I recognize his reflection on earth. Forgiveness is truth's reflection. Tells me how to offer miracles and escape the prison in which I think I live. All the world shines in the reflection of its holy light, and I perceive a world forgiven at last. The Course goes on to say, a world forgiven cannot last. It was the world of bodies. So, to forgive the world means to extend a reflection of God's love and forgiveness onto the world, which is a neutral nothingness, so that the world is forgiven and seen in a forgiving way, which translates the world's form into a reflection of heaven. Now, a translation is always once removed. It is, you take the original, you convert it through a transformational process, a translation which changes it, and then you look upon the translation. So as earth becomes translated into heaven, we actually in our minds look at the translation. I know there's a quote somewhere that says that you look upon the translated version based on what you gave to the world in order to have it look different to you, and you look at the version which has been translated. So if the original earth is in Spanish and you translate it into English, you see the English, but the world itself is still Spanish. The translation is not the thing itself. It is once removed. So the reflection of heaven is once removed from the thing that it is reflecting. The reflection seen in the world, the reflection of truth, the reflection of God, is still a translated version of what's there and not the thing itself. The world is still nothing. And here's another part about how the mind transitions from the reflection of heaven on earth into heaven. A sleeping mind must waken as it sees its own perfection mirroring the Lord of life so perfectly that it then, as we go past, perfectly it fades into what is reflected. So now we're talking about going beyond the reflection, beyond space-time, beyond the mirror, beyond the void, beyond earth, beyond the body, beyond the reflection of God, beyond the forgiven world, beyond the real world. As the Course says, even the real world will vanish from your sight, and the world will be forgotten as it spins into nothingness from which it came. your mind fades into what it was reflecting. So it goes from reflecting love and heaven on earth and moves into heaven, through the gates of heaven, into heaven itself. And now it is no more a mere reflection. It becomes the thing that was reflected, and the light which makes reflection possible. Now, no vision now is needed, no perception needed, for the awakened mind in heaven is one that knows its source, its self, its holiness. It is in the actual condition and the state of holiness, which only is possible in heaven. Nothing in the world can be fundamentally, inherently holy. The loving thoughts that you have about the world have eternal qualities in them because they reflect heaven. But besides those thoughts and those projections onto the world itself doesn't have a way of being holy, because the world is the denial of holiness. It can't exist without resisting God. The void can only remain so long as we stay away from everything. The empty screen that we project onto can only remain empty and be a screen and be a mirror for as long as we don't want to be in God. So as you go to true perception, we do not see the ego's shadow on the world today. So earth is neutral and it can reflect heaven or hell. The ego can project its shadow onto the world in false perception, or we can transition into true perception, which symbolizes heaven, and project light and forgiveness and love onto the same neutral world. We see the light, and in it we see heaven's reflection lie across the world. Not heaven itself, but heaven's reflection. The light of heaven shines on the world. As it says somewhere else, God's light, or God shines upon it of himself. The light of heaven shines on the world, and you see the reflection in the world. There are some statements maybe in the Bible about how heaven is spread out across the world, but you do not see it. Or next to every grievance there's a miracle been laid, like a kind of like a blanket of heaven or whatever across the world in front of your face. But we have to be careful, because we must maintain the metaphysics and remember that this is actually a reflection of heaven. Heaven cannot be combined with the world and keep the world. Heaven is a singular state of reality and existence and truth. A separate world that is a void and is neutral and nothing and is made to oppose God cannot remain if there is the presence of God. That's why the Course says that the body cannot remain if you were to maintain God in your mind. There is no guilt in which a separated world can remain. When the idea of separation is undone, the mirror has to disappear, because it is the idea of separation. The world that you made began in error, but it will end in the reflection of God's holiness. The world will end The end of the world is not its destruction, but its translation into heaven. People throw this around. It still says the end of the world. People gloss over the end of the world part and like to focus on the translation into heaven as if it's saying it's going to be kept. But the world is going to end. The world ends in laughter because it's a place of sorrow. A forgiven world cannot last. The world absolutely is going to end. There will be an end to space and time and the sun and the stars and the galaxies and the planet Earth and all the bodies, every single object, all of these separate things, whether you see them as separate or joined, whether you see them as focusing on their differences or focusing on their unity, they will come to an end because they require separation to exist. As soon as the separation goes, you cannot have space or time or spatially separated atoms and molecules, physical bodies. They can't exist without separation. Everything about them will go. They will vanish. The stars will disappear in light. Eternity will shine away the world as the world spins into the nothingness from which it came. We will just drop it, and the whole world will just disappear. The world that you made in error will end in the reflection of holiness. So you come to forgive the world and sort of say, I forgive you, you can go now. And that will then disappear. I will forgive and this will disappear. Illusions recognized must disappear. A forgiven world cannot last. If you forgive the world, it is going to vanish. Some people don't seem to like this idea. They want to keep the world. So they think that when it says the world ends in a translation into heaven, they think that this means heaven and earth are one, as it says. They interpret it to mean it's one thing. And therefore earth will be kept and will stay and will keep having physical bodies and machine guns and all the rest of the crap in heaven forever and ever. That is not the teaching. The teaching is that all of this stuff will disappear. You can reflect heaven's holiness upon the earth, but that's as far as you can go. As Jesus says in the Course, no perception, no matter how holy, will last forever. And just because it says earth and heaven become one, or everything around you seems to be a part of yourself, it is because of the projection of unity and oneness coming out of you. You're seeing a reflection of heaven's nature in it, which makes it seem as if earth is like heaven, as if earth is unified, as if heaven is upon the earth. But fundamentally, inherently, the world cannot have heaven as an inherent attribute. So it must come to an end. The mirror, the void, space and time must end. You first see the reflection of God in them, which shines them away, and eventually the strength of the light will literally extinguish the mirror. Planet Earth, it will just disappear. Illusions leave no trace behind in their going. Your holiness lights up heaven and brings to earth, apparently as a separate place, brings to earth the pure reflection of the light above, wherein earth and heaven are joined as one. The perfect reflection and the symbolic form, earthly form of love, forgiveness, is put upon the earth causing it to seem as though there's no difference between heaven and earth. Earth is reflecting heaven, heaven is being heaven. Put them side by side, they look pretty much identical, but earth is still just an image of a reflection in a mirror looking like heaven. You bring to earth from heaven the pure reflection of the light of heaven, in which earth and heaven seem to be joined as one. Oneness doesn't always mean a singular thing. It also means they are alike. They are of the same kind. They seem similar. So earth and heaven get to a state where earth seems heaven-like, but it still is limited because earth is still fundamentally nothing. It's still made of separation. It still has bodies and damage and destruction and wars and so on. But your mind interprets it differently. You cannot keep these abominations and have them be a true part of heaven, because the limitedness, the separateness, the conflict cannot exist in heaven. In a truly holy state, all of the things that earth depends on for its form and its existence and its functioning are not possible. It is incompatible with heaven. God's laws do not obtain directly to a world that perception rules. The mirror, void, nothingness world, which your variable perceptions of illusions projected onto an illusory world rules. Such a world could not have been created by the mind to which perception has no meaning. God could not have created a void. God could not have created a mirror. God could not have created something that has no inherent meaning. God could not have created space or time. God could not have created an illusion of a world, physical forms, human bodies. God did not create the body. God did not create planet Earth. God did not create the sun and the stars, or the galaxies, or the space or the time that they contain in. A mind such as God's could not create a meaningless world. As it says in the Course, God did not create a meaningless world. So because the world is meaningless, it is not a creation of God. Yet are his laws reflected everywhere. Not that the world where the reflection is real at all. The world where the reflection is the space-time illusory mirror, planet Earth, physical forms, matter, energy, particles, physical structures, which is a neutral nothingness pretending to be something, acting like a mirror because it has no inherent attributes of its own, able to function like a mirror because it's neutral and nothing and has no self-image, reflects other things. The world where the reflection is, the mirror, is not real at all. That's my last quote because it's going to run out of juice. But so, sort of in summary then, I've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of discussions with people about the world and space-time and the earth and perception and reflections in the world and the forgiven world and the real world. And there's still a great amount of resistance and debate and disagreement. It's all over the place. Some people have very, very weird beliefs. Some people are spot on and they already understand how and why earth cannot be heaven itself. Other people understand that earth can reflect heaven and be heaven-like and be forgiven and loved, but they can't quite go far enough as to say that the reason why you can reflect heaven here is because it is meaningless and that it will end, or that heaven can be somewhere else. So when you reflect heaven on earth, it's almost like bringing heaven to earth. But it's not the same thing as being in heaven. Somewhere there's a quote where Jesus says that when you actually go to heaven, the meaning of love will be greater still than it meant to you on earth. When you were reflecting heaven's love on earth as forgiveness, when you go into heaven and actually leave the world and be in heaven fully, love will mean even more to you than it meant in your heaven on earth reflection. Let me just see if I can grab that. If I can remember the wording. What love will mean. Forgiveness is an earthly form of love, which, as it is in heaven, has no form. So there is a difference, because on earth the reflection of heaven is a form of love, but in heaven love has no form. What is needed here is given here as it is needed in this world. In this form you can fulfill your function even here. Although, what love will mean to you when formlessness has been restored to you is greater still. Salvation of the world depends on you who can forgive, such as your function here. Your function on earth is forgiveness and healing. Your function in heaven is creation. You share the Holy Spirit's function on earth. You share God's function in heaven. These are distinct states. Heaven is like the original reality realm of existing, and then we made a world that seems to be outside of heaven. There is no life outside of heaven. Outside of heaven, life is illusion. You're safe in God dreaming of exile. We made an exile world, a separate world, a second world, a void opposite to God's nature, which we temporarily project the meaning of forgiveness and love onto on earth, making earth a reflection of heaven as a form of love. But when you have gone past the world and you return to your original nature, to be without a body is to be in your natural state. Formlessness, not bodies. Love will mean even more to you. So that means that even when you're experiencing the reflection of heaven on earth, even if you're in true perception, even if you're seeing the face of Christ, even if you are in the real world, you're still not fully immersed in God. Even if you're seeing God in everything you see, you're still not fully in communion with God. You're in a state of communication. You have to go through the gates of heaven, past the real world, forget the world, forget the earth, forget the void, forget the nothingness, and fully, totally wake up in heaven as holiness. Jesus is true. And then you will fully experience the meaning of love in its original form, which will be so far beyond anything you have ever experienced on earth, in any state. And of course, actually says this too. Nothing on earth you cannot understand how much your Father loves you, for there is no parallel in your experience of the world to help you understand it. There is nothing on earth with which it can compare. Nothing you have ever felt, apart from Him, that resembles it ever so faintly. So quite honestly, basically we attain a state that is somewhat like heaven, reflected on earth, and it's pretty great, and it's loving, and it's harmless, and it's peaceful, and it's happy, and it's joyful, and it's powerful and miraculous, and there's healing, and there's life-giving resurrection, and the reflection of God is seen in the world. Heaven is seen as reflected across the world, but it still falls short of your true home and your true inherent nature in heaven with God. And we have to get past the world. We have to get to the point where we're willing to go home. This world is not my home. Only in God, without a body and without a world surrounding your mind, only free from bodies forever, fully infinite and unlimited and natural and formless and one with everything. Only then can you fully experience love from God. Until then, you can have revelations, you can have visions of Christ, you can have perceptions of the real world, you can see the forgiven world and its loveliness, which all by themselves are pretty fantastic. But we've got to be careful we don't just stop there and try to make earth out to be heaven, because it isn't. This is not where we're supposed to stay forever. We're supposed to go home to God. And we will. It is guaranteed that we will transcend all of space and time. Earth will disappear, the stars will disappear in light, and we will wake up in heaven with God in love. Right now, this is my fullest understanding of what A Course in Miracles is saying. I don't see any flaws in it. I don't think there's any way that it could be more accurate. I'm always open to possibilities and other views and stuff, but this is what I've come to over time, and I think most people would agree with it if they can see the sense in it. Hopefully this was helpful in some way. So, some people are pretty strongly resistant to the idea that Earth is not God's creation, and it's all very well forgiving it and loving it, but we have to also remember we don't really belong here. This is an alien world to us. This isn't like what heaven is like. If you think this world is fantastic and lovable and amazing and a testament to God's perfection, just you wait till you get home to heaven and you're going to be stunned. See you next time. Love you. Bye.